It is a busy time at the moment, or seemingly so, for discussions about ownership, particularly of the country's two biggest clubs, Manchester United and Liverpool. We'll get to Manchester United in just a moment, but we will start with Liverpool. Miguel, the back page of the Metro: Kops not for sale. Reds looking for investors, not buyers, insists owners Henry. We don't often hear from owners of clubs like Liverpool and Manchester United, Miguel, so it's interesting to get a bit of clarity from John W. Henry via the Boston Sports Globe.
Yeah, I mean, and this shift was heralded about a month ago, so it's interesting he's actually gone on record and confirmed it. I wonder how much of this is related to a story we're going to be talking about, which is the sale of Manchester United, because it almost feels now that Liverpool maybe investigated the possibility of, FSG investigated the possibility of a sale at the wrong time, because I suppose United is seen as a more valuable global asset, and they were essentially competing for buyers. So it's potentially one consequence of the Manchester United situation.
How do you see it, Mark? Do you see it that the two huge clubs, the two biggest in the Premier League in terms of the global reach and the value, could both change hands should they want to? Or do you sort of take Miguel's point there that it is because Manchester United are in the process of being sold that maybe Liverpool can't be done at the same time?
I think that's part of it, but I think at the time when FSG went public, it did feel like they were kind of dipping their toe in the water a bit to see what sort of investment possibilities were out there. And in many ways, that Liverpool are possibly a more attractive buy than Man United, because the ground is nearly done to the level they want it to be. The team has performed better in recent years, and they haven't got massive levels of debt. So anyone that buys Man United has to deal with all that. So Liverpool have got all that done. So Liverpool are still an attractive proposition, but equally, there's not a lot of money around in the world right now. Obviously, there's a financial downturn, and it's only in the kind of the oil-rich states that have got the money to do that. So the Qataris are looking at United. They haven't seemed to have gone for Liverpool. So FSG maybe taken a longer view of the thing, thinking that, well, if something happens in terms of Super League or a kind of diluted version of Super League, it's worth sticking around. So I wouldn't be surprised if they find that investment. But it didn't surprise me that John Henry came out with that today, because it did seem at the time, right at the outset, that Liverpool were looking for investment rather than a sale.
It's interesting, Miguel, because we're going to go on to your piece, which talks about the huge amount of money washing around in the Premier League, particularly from sort of Gulf-owned states, but also big hedge funds as well. Liverpool's model has been responsible. It's been pretty much we spend what we bring in. But does that model eventually have limitations in terms of falling behind those who are able to just chuck money away hand over fist?
Well, this is one of the main issues in the game right now, which is basically the immense financial stretch that's distorting competitive balance. That is makes it so it's a narrower and narrower field of clubs that can win. I mean, there are issues with Liverpool's ownership as well. I would say I'm not really sure it's good for kind of venture capitalists or even that entire model to be owning football clubs. I mean, really, football clubs should be owned by supporter trusts, and it's remarkable we keep having these same conversations at the same time that a government white paper is coming out, and football regulation is so thin. But yeah, it is one potential issue from that type of ownership.
Miguel, let's stay with you and move from Liverpool to Manchester United. Side panel in the Star this evening from Jeremy Cross. Manchester United will be used for sports washing if it's sold to the Qatari group. Amnesty International has warned. Your piece in the Independent Online, Miguel, it's incredibly detailed in terms of everything, the moral dilemmas and everything else that faces the game and the Premier League, I guess, if the Qatari ownership arrives at Manchester United. Maybe you can just sort of try and compact it a little bit, which I know is difficult because there's so much to go at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is a story of enormity. It could be of huge influence to football's future and where it goes for two main reasons. One, obviously, is that Manchester United are pretty much the biggest football institution in the UK, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and they would become the biggest example of this problem, which is how the game and clubs are used for the purposes of these states with hugely criticised human rights records. And it's all, the phrase is sports washing. I think sports washing is a phrase actually quite reductive now. It doesn't truly kind of articulate what this is about, which is about influence and buying off the infrastructure of states without having to change the nature of their own. I mean, look at all the discussion we've had about Qatar and the build to the World Cup, particularly as regards laws on homosexuality and the nature of the migrant labour system. But then there's the other side to this, and this is where football has got itself into such a mess, where we could well have a situation where 3 of the Premier League's clubs are owned by Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar. They're the three primary states, or the driving states in the Gulf blockade. So the Premier League pretty much becomes their preserve for this political rivalry. After that, of course, there's a knock-on effect on football as well, which is because I mean, these are basically states with unlimited money due to oil economies. And again, it comes back to this issue where it creates this financial stretch that just causes problems right down the pyramid.
Another part of the piece, Mark, which is interesting that Miggs has written, is that link between the state and these supposed funds which are looking to buy the club. And we had this issue with Newcastle last year, and whether it was the Saudi state or the Public Investment Fund, and supposedly there was no link. And Miguel says in his point, it makes it all the more incredible and an utter indictment that the Premier League did not take the chance to upgrade its owners and directors as regards state bodies and influence. We're going to talk about whether fans should really care about who owns their clubs, but it's certainly up to, again, the game's governing bodies to care, isn't it?
Yeah, I think The Guardian published a Freedom of Information request earlier this year, and it was basically revealed that the government didn't apply pressure on the Premier League to pass the Newcastle sale, but it kind of helped the transition to overcome the difficulties, which were, finding out whether there was state interference. Now, the big issue in all this is that Miguel's right in the sense that it is kind of uneasy to have this kind of level of state interest, shall we say, in the Premier League. But all these countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE, are big allies of the UK government, the big trade partners of the UK government. And I think when push comes to shove, I don't think the Premier League will have the government support to block any takeover by any of these regimes, because they're massive trade partners. And ultimately, football is football. But, the government we're talking about huge levels of trade and influence. And, I just don't see the football regulator, if it ever comes, having the power to say to one of these owners, you can't buy one of our football clubs, because it goes beyond that. It goes beyond football. It goes beyond state politics. And I think that's the problem that football has to overcome, and it can't overcome, because politics and state is much bigger than football. I think while the government has a vested interest in relations with Saudi, with the UAE, Qatar, and other very wealthy countries, I don't think it'll change.
Would it be fair to say, though, Mark, if we use Manchester United as the example, that to some extent some sections of support don't really care who owns the club as long as it's not the Glazers?
Absolutely, that's right. And I think some fans, I think United fans have been criticised by a lot of people in recent days about not showing enough passion against this. I think that's wrong. I think the United fans and Liverpool fans during these takeover talks, a small group maybe, have been very vocal about it and very anti about it. But obviously, if there's a majority of fans that are happy for their clubs to be owned by anybody, then that's the majority. And I think social media is not a very good gauge. But again, if you go on social media, it's very much pro Qatar, certainly Man City fans, pro Abu Dhabi. I think there are a small group of fans on each side that are prepared to be vocal about it and raise their objections. But unfortunately, they are washed away by the majority, and the majority at times just want to see a winning football team, no matter what the cost. And that is a sad thing to say, but that's the reality.
Yeah, go on, Miguel.
Fans shouldn't be put in this position. Again, it goes back to the game's authorities. The Premier League has spoken about how after the Newcastle takeover, they were in consultation with Amnesty about changing the owners and directors. And that would even be the most basic step to say, that sovereign funds couldn't own clubs. But Amnesty, they told us at The Independent, I refer to it in the piece, they're still waiting for a follow-up meeting with the Premier League. And again, it's just incredible we're in this situation. The same discussions, we've seen the same processes, even the same fan reaction as Mark talks about. But again, fans just shouldn't have to deal with this.
The other point, Mark, I guess, would be, and I think the Manchester United Supporters Trust came out yesterday and said, look, we want whoever buys the club to have a respect for all parts of the community, particularly LGBTQ+ and women, which was a conversation and questions were being asked over the course of the World Cup about how much Qatar cared about those sections of society. But you sort of wonder whether any progress is being made or whether people at the top of the game are really listening when people say we want everyone in society to be respected within the game of football, and who's owning and looking after big clubs and big tournaments.
Yeah, I do think the Premier League on its own are very, very kind of proactive in that element of it. But when it comes to ownership groups and ownership models, it is very difficult for the Premier League to go beyond their remit. And I think, if like I say, if the government gets involved and if the government has a direct interest in who owns football clubs and who doesn't, then it's very difficult for the Premier League to put the barriers up, because the government will block it. The government will say, well, quietly maybe, that we have a massive trade deal with this country. We sell arms, we sell products to these countries. it will be negative for the UK in the government's eyes for some of these regimes to be barred from owning football clubs, and that, unfortunately, is something the Premier League, no matter how powerful it is, can't overcome.